11th school board meeting to order. First item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda as submitted, and this is for possible action.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion by Dawn, second by Joe. Any discussion by the trustees? See none. Any public comment on the agenda?
Seeing no public comment?
All right, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Trustee Ramirez, will you lead us in the pledge, please?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Third item on the agenda is superintendent's report. This is for information only. Mr. Stokes, good evening.
Thank you. Thank you, President Walker. Members of the board, good evening. Tomorrow starts a new school year for the district. We'll have our teachers returning to their school for staff meetings and to prepare their spaces for students. The week of August the 17th through the 21st will be a time of training. We have invited not only our certified staff, but also our support staff who will be studying different ways and systems for helping to deliver remote information or education. Our first day for students is scheduled for August the 24th, and as you know, on our hybrid schedule, that will be the first homeroom class that will be held, and then on the next day, on the Tuesday, will be the first day of cohort 1, and then Wednesday will be cohort 2. So we look forward to the new school year and an exciting way of doing a job that we've done for years, but this will certainly be a different format. I'd like to say thanks to our parents and also to our staff who were part of helping to fill out and count up our parent intent forms. Wanted to report to the trustees that we had approximately 6,342 responses. And out of our last year's enrollment of 7,700 approximately, that was a pretty good number. We are still expecting families who may be new to the area or who may not have heard about the parent intent form to certainly contact the school district office so that we can get their information. Of those 6,342 responses, about 1,652 families, or approximately 25% of our enrollment, has elected to enroll in the 100% online or remote process. So that's a significant number, and we're gearing up for that. We've also had a number of families who have indicated that they plan to homeschool their children. For a total then of those families who have elected to use the hybrid plan, that number is 4,690. And again, we will still accept information as families come to understand the process and submit that information to the school district.
Hey, Mr. Stokes.
Yes.
Are we reaching out to those families who are choosing homeschooling and letting them know how we could support them with remote learning and keeping them as associated with our school district?
Thank you, Mr. Walker. That's a great question. Yes, we're anxious that our families understand the difference between remote learning and homeschooling. And in many cases, the homeschooling is a dedicated choice. And in some cases, there are families that have young children, especially in the kindergarten age, where families may be electing to keep their kids home for another year. Kindergarten, as you know, is not required in the state of Nevada. And so that certainly plays into the thinking, I think, of some of our families. I'd like to also state that as of last Friday, staffing in the district was not bad. I don't know if that's a measurable statement or not, but We had 2 vacancies at Fremont. We had 1 vacancy at Empire. We had 1 vacancy at Carson Middle. And we had 1 vacancy at Carson High School with an additional vacancy as a social worker. So 2, 4, really only 6 positions were vacant as of last Friday. Now, please be advised that those numbers are changing daily as the different conditions of our staff members are changing. Obviously, there's an issue of daycare and childcare for some of our families, and that's playing into some of the decisions that's going into staffing and decisions about whether or not to work for our next school year. And then the last item, I've asked Mr. Russell if he'd be kind enough to share a little information regarding SB 4, which was passed in the most recent special session of the legislature. As you know, this particular bill got a lot of press. There was a lot of talk and discussion. This is the bill that for most of the employers in the state of Nevada have some protections with regard to liability should employees receive or come down with COVID-19. And there were 2 industries that were not included in that bill, one being public schools and the other hospitals. And so Mr. Russell was kind enough to spend a few minutes to go into a little more detail on this particular bill.
Thank you, Mr. Stokes. Mr. President, at the last meeting of the Board of Trustees, I was asked a question about potential liability in relation to a COVID claim. And after answering that question, the legislature passed a new bill that provided immunity for several agencies, but as Mr. Stokes said, carved out school districts or public schools. I wanted to tell you guys that the advice I gave you, in my opinion, remains. This bill provided immunity, which is obviously a defense to a claim that can be made. You still have what I think is the best defense available to you, and that is compliance with the law. So if you are following all of the governor's emergency directives, the local health guidance, and other applicable laws, that is a defense to any claim that could be made. In other words, there would still have to be some negligent act on behalf of the school district that was deemed a breach of a duty owed to the claimant, which was the proximate cause of damages, right? And so if they don't have that crucial element, negligence, a negligent act by the district, then we are still shielded from liability. In addition to that, if somebody was able to actually prove that they contracted the virus at work, it would most likely be treated as a workers' comp event anyway. And so when I read this bill, I was not happy, to be very honest with you guys. But I think the advice remains sound, that compliance with the law is your best defense. And as far as individually, public officers of the state of Nevada are still provided immunity for their acts while taken in their official role. And so this bill, while alarming, I don't think changes the landscape for you guys as far as liability. It just doesn't provide you the absolute defense of immunity that's provided for some of the other entities in the bill. And so with that, I would like to keep this brief, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about it.
Thanks, Ryan. I was just curious, what was the rationale behind not including hospitals and schools? Did they provide much?
Well, I'll talk about schools specifically. I think it was a push based on some of the teachers' unions in the bigger counties' desire to not go back to work until the pandemic is addressed.
Mr. President, members of the board, that's the end of my report, unless you have another question for me.
I do have another question just regarding kindergarten registration, because with schools closed during the month of March, when typically a lot of kindergarten registration opens, are we sending out information to let parents know offices are opening again and how to go about registering students?
I fully intend Trustee Crossman to put out a robocall to all of our families to let them know that school's starting up again. And I'll specifically include kindergarten. We're interested to see what those numbers look like. Right now, they look kind of low. And there's been such a push in getting school started that, some of those things that we've done annually for so long have not necessarily occurred yet. So yes, we will certainly reach out regarding our kindergarten families. You bet.
Thank you, Mr. Stokes. Item number 4 on the agenda, board reports. We'll start with Don.
Dr. Conley, principal at Eagle Valley Middle School, has a announcement. Back to school boot camp is a week from Thursday, August 20th. It's going to be held at 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and it's for 6th graders and new students only. 1 adult allowed with each student. And please no other family or friends to help maintain social distancing requirements. Students will receive their schedules and laptops if they don't already have them, as well as other important information about the upcoming school year and services. Unfortunately, due to COVID restrictions, no school tour or teacher meet and greet will be available. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Don. Stacy.
Just an announcement that the Pacific Region annual meeting for August is tomorrow. So if anybody has any issues that they want to bring up with the other 7 states, let me know. And I'll be sending out a little report so you kind of know what the other 7 states are going through too. So keep you updated.
Thank you. Richard.
No report, but I would like to say that I've reviewed the video that Fremont put out, and I thought it was very cute, very well done. So kudos to them, and hopefully the school year will go relatively well, if not extremely well. And I just want to thank the teachers for coming back to work, and we're hoping for the best for everybody.
Joe.
No official report tonight, but I just wanted to extend on what Richard said. I wanted to thank the parents and everybody who sent emails and concerns into the school district. It's hard to address them all. As Richard indicated, we got a tremendous amount of input from folks, and people are rightly concerned, and we appreciate the concerns, the questions, the opinions, and now we're here to open up schools and make this as successful as we can for our students, who deserve nothing less than that, and welcome back to school.
And I'm just wondering, did you and Stacy coordinate tonight? Color coordinate your shirts? Laurel.
Mr. Brown from Fritz Elementary School would like to welcome Gina Hoppy as the new assistant principal. And also, he wanted to let all the parents and families of Fritz know that Fritz is in the process of restructuring the classes to support the new models, and will be notifying parents early next week which cohort their student will be attending. And also, I asked for an update from Dr. Ward DeJoseph at Fremont Elementary, and at first she told me, I'm just making magic happen in a mask, and I'll be watching from my office. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to all of the administrators and support staff, the secretaries, the teachers, everyone who is making magic happen in a mask and working such long hours to make this work. I know it's a lot of additional work and a lot of new things that everybody's learning, and I really appreciate that. And then just now she sent me a message that she forgot about the digital open house that will be happening on Thursday, August 20th at 4:30. So that's my report for Fremont and Fritz.
Thank you. Lupe?
No official report either. I just want to say to the parents that we really appreciate their patience, and that we look forward to their collaboration with this new model that we're about to begin.
Thank you. And I'll just concur, I've obviously heard from a lot of people, over the course of the summer. We've heard from a lot of parents and staff members, and there's a lot of concerns on all sides. And we had a team of parents, teachers, administrators, community members who really worked on this school reopening plan. And we have procedures in place to keep staff and students as safe as we possibly can. And so, I want people to know that a lot of thought went into this. We have a lot of people that have been working on this, and we're going to have to work together. This is going to be a year unlike any year we've had recently. And so we're going to have to support each other and really take care to watch out for these kiddos and each other in the classrooms and support each other. And we're just going to have to kind of hold ourselves steady until things get better and we're back to normal, which I think everybody in this room is hoping is a lot sooner rather than later. So that would be my report. Next item on the agenda is association reports.
Yes, Mr. President.
Mr.
Thank
Wallace?
you. Brian Wallace, Ormsby County Education Association President. Mr. President, trustees, Mr. Stokes, district staff. I would just like to chime in on the liability question there from the association side, that NSCA was a major factor in having schools carved out of that. It is very unfortunate that other school districts just throughout the state do not have our relationship. It did cause me a little bit of heartburn watching that take place. But in the meantime, I'm watching what is taking place in Washoe right now during their school board meeting, where their employees still do not have answers. And yet they're slated to return to school on Monday. Students still do not have answers. Parents still do not have answers. Clark County, as we know, is Clark County, and I'll leave it at that. Rural counties are in a little better place than Carson City is. But even then, their relationships, if something were to happen, are as such that they don't know and they don't have the trust. They don't trust their school board, they don't trust their superintendents, and they don't trust their site administration. That's not the way things are here in Carson City. As you know, you've heard me plenty of times, probably too many at this point out that we are very different than the other 16. That you're responsive to the association, the district's responsive to the association. I can't thank Ann enough for everything that she's been working on the past week, not just staff safety, but just other little things along the road that we needed to take care of. And I mean we. We had some abuses with some issues when it comes to personal appliances in classrooms, and that's one of my personal pet peeves, because they shouldn't be taking place, and we as professionals on the certified side need to own that, and we're going to own it, and we're going to fix it and clean it up. But because we have these lines of communications, we don't have the issues, and that's what I'm hoping we don't have as we move forward. But we all must be on the same footings as we do this. Regardless of our political beliefs, regardless of our own personal beliefs, regardless, as you just stated, Mr. President and Mr. Cassiopo, we're here for the kids. I want to be that selfish teacher from time to time and worry about my own personal safety and et cetera. And I have my own personal thoughts on it, but that's where it ends right there. They're my own personal thoughts, and I don't need to be dragging them into this district at this point in time, upsetting anything else, considering what we're doing. We have been deemed essential employees. We have directives from the governor, whether we agree with them or not, and we're going to do our best to follow those, because that's what we need to do so we can get children back into the classroom as safely as we possibly can. Thank you. Ms. Finn also has comments.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace.
Hello. Good evening, President Walker, trustees, Mr. Stokes, Tasha, AJ, and Renee. For the record, my name is Carrie Finn. I'm the president of the Carson Educational Support Association. This has been an interesting first year to be president, to say the least. My summer was filled with tons of meetings, phone calls, and emails about the uncertainties of what might happen in the new school year. The Carson Educational Support Association would like to acknowledge and thank Mr. Stokes, Dr. Delphin, Tasha, AJ, Jolie, and Sear, and Dr. Lennox for working with me and answering all of our questions and numerous emails. I want to share with you some good news that happened over the summer. Thanks to Valerie Dockery, Jessica Greener, Tasha, AJ, and Dr. Delphin, the district was able to save 6 Para 1 positions. A lot of meetings were held behind the scenes to secure these positions, and CESA would like to acknowledge everyone's hard work in doing so. I would also like to thank Dr. Lennox for saving 5 deaf and hard of hearing positions that would have been lost due to students leaving the district. Dr. Lennox found positions for all of them elsewhere in the district. As we start the new school year, I know there are a lot of uncertainties. We need to take each day one day at a time and do the best we can, encouraging one another and keeping the lines of communication open with our administrators and district office. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. You know, and really to both of you, I think one of the things we take for granted is that great relationship we do have with our, our bargaining units. And I think we all just kind of know that's just the Carson way. And so we do appreciate the support of not only those leading your organizations, but also all the teachers you represent and all the staff members and all the administrators in those groups. I think that we're fortunate in the fact that we know when we have tough times and we go to the different units, everybody kind of looks out for the kids in the district, and that's not always the case. So we do appreciate all you all do.
Thank you.
Do we have any other association reports? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Comments will be accepted through telephonic participation or through virtual participation via email at publiccomment@carson.k12.nv.us. Comments may be made by members of the public on any matter within the authority of this board. Please note that public comment will be taken on items marked for possible action before action is taken on such items. And members of the public are encouraged to comment on such items at the time they are being considered. Although members of the board may respond to questions and discuss issues raised during public comment, no action may be taken on such a matter until the matter is placed on an agenda for action at a meeting of the board. In making public comment, speakers are asked to identify themselves for the record. Speakers are further asked to refrain from speaking over each other if participating by telephone. Speakers are asked to limit their comments to no more than 3 minutes, whether in writing or oral, and not to simply repeat comments made by others. This is for discussion only. Do we have any public comment?
See no public comment.
Okay. Ms. Cortez?
This public comment is from Frankie Quintana. She's wondering how are we addressing our elementary students, more specifically grades K through 3, on the hybrid system? Are the students going to be provided devices to work on while online when they are at home? Are paper packets being issued on those days that they are home? Is there a plan in place at this time to better address our little ones and continue their academic learning? Our next public comment is from Beverly Singleton. After looking at the diagram provided at the last board meeting for bus riders, where there is to be 2 students to a seat, and at Governor Sisolak's Declaration Directive 028, I wonder how this seating follows Section 2, subsection 3 of said directive. Section 2, county school districts, charter schools, and private schools may adopt social distancing protocols with the following minimum allowable distances in accordance with recommendations by the American Association of Pediatricians and Nevada's Medical Advisory Team. 3, regardless of age, for all passengers on school buses, while on school buses 3 feet apart from other passengers and 6 feet apart from the driver. County school districts, charter schools, and private schools may maintain social distancing protocols that are stricter than the standards in this directive, but they may not adopt standards that are less restrictive without an approved variance. According to information I found, large school buses are typically 90 inches wide, and there's a minimum requirement of 12 inches for the aisleway. When one divides the remaining 78 inches by the 2 seats, that leaves a width of 39 inches per seat. Therefore, it isn't possible to have the required 3 feet social distancing between students. Has this district acquired an approved variance for the less restrictive standards?
Thank you. And Mr. Stokes, we'll have somebody from the staff reach out to those staff members and provide some guidance. So I appreciate that, Mr. Stokes. Number 7, discussion and proposed changes to CCSD Regulation 525, Student Conduct and Discipline, for discussion only, and this will be Ann Alexander and Tasha Fuson. Good evening, ladies.
Good evening, President Walker, and thank you. As you stated, we are proposing some changes to District Regulation 525 based on Assembly Bill 168 of the 2019 Nevada legislative session. That during that session, they made substantial changes to student discipline provisions in state law. So Mrs. Ann Alexander has graciously agreed to work with our district, as she has in the past. She's a familiar face to all of you, to provide us some guidance and help us update our policy and Regulation 520, in this particular case, Regulation 525. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Alexander.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. Are we on? Yeah, all right. I'm happy to share with you the work that I've been doing with the administration over the last year, really, since Assembly Bill 168 was enacted by the 2019 legislature. It really made sweeping changes to Nevada's statutory requirements around student discipline, and those are all carried in NRS 392. So those were pretty controversial changes to the state's discipline law. I'm aware that there are some amendments, budget bill drafts already being developed at this point in time to try to straighten some of this out as we go into the next legislative session. But of course, in the midst of coming into compliance with all of this, COVID happened. And I just want to congratulate your administration, of course, for always being able to keep all of the balls in the air at the same time and attend to these matters that are very important despite the other very pressing concerns that you have. So the changes that are proposed here really are prompted by 2 overarching concerns. One is the need for the district at all time to be in compliance in your discipline procedures with what it is that state law requires. But the second is that this also gave us an opportunity to try to streamline what it is that your discipline procedures set forth for what has to be done in 2 specific scenarios. One is when there is a short-term suspension of a student for 10 days or less, and then the much more robust procedures that are required if a student's going to be removed for more than 10 days or perhaps expelled. Whenever you have an opportunity to streamline those procedures, you can increase the likelihood that your building administrators are going to be able to understand and implement those procedures, and that provides enhanced defense to you should we ever be challenged for suspending or expelling a student. One of the first things the court's very interested in is whether or not you've complied with your own procedures. So one of the things that we've been trying to do in this revision was to streamline those procedures, make them compliant with state and federal legal expectations, but make it an easier thing for building administrators to implement. In that streamlining process, one of the things that we did also was to maintain every part of board engagement that is required in state or federal law. So we've preserved your engagement in discipline decisions, but only where it's required by law. So I wanted to share a couple of highlights about what changed in the 2019 legislature about discipline. You've probably heard some of this before.
First is that the legislature decided to impose some very specific requirements for school administrators to be working with students through a process called restorative justice. And the legislature, seems kind of new to this concept of restorative justice, but I would suggest to you that administrators in Carson City School District have been using these kinds of non-punitive behavior support mechanisms for trying to actually change student behavior for a very long time, even if they didn't call it restorative justice. But that's what it's about. It's an attempt by our state legislature to make sure that schools are working with students and families and not simply expelling them, not simply suspending them, but trying to work to change the circumstances that lead a student to be in that position in the first place. And so they've made that more formal, and they now require that some planning be engaged in, some specific planning around those non-punitive support measures for helping students to improve their behavior. So there's a lot in that new law about that work, and your administrators, like I said, have been doing that for a long time, maybe not as formally as state law now requires it. The other changes, I think, are much more stark, and they do represent a dramatic change for the way that schools operated before. The first has to do with the fact that now, with one exception that I'll get to in a moment, no student in the state of Nevada may be suspended or expelled unless the student is at least 11 years old. The one exception is that general education students found to be in possession of a firearm or a dangerous weapon may be suspended or expelled at any age. But that's the only exception to the age 11 rule. If a school wants to permanently expel a student who's under the age of 11, the law permits that school to ask for your approval to proceed with that a permanent expulsion. So there is a way for a very serious offense for schools to permanently expel a student under the age of 11, but only with your approval. That was a dramatic change, as you can imagine, and your administrators and your staff have been working already for a year, putting those requirements into place while we caught up with specific procedures in the admin regulations. But your employees have been complying with state law since it was enacted. The second thing that changed a great deal is that special education students who are receiving IEP services, state law now says, first, those students have to be at least 11, but state law also says no special education student can be suspended for more than 5 days per occurrence of misconduct. So you cannot suspend a special education student who's receiving IEP services for 6 days or 7 days or 8 days or 9 days or 20 days or 90 days. You may suspend for up to 5 per misconduct, and you can permanently expel them, but nothing in the middle. And then, before a school administrator even suspends a special education student for even a half a day, there's a requirement that there be a review to make sure that if the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act required any particular thing in its discipline protocol, that the IDEA has been complied with before even a 1/2 day suspension is implemented. So those are two very dramatic changes that we've accounted for in these proposed changes. So what remains the same? Well, It is still true that a school principal may suspend a student up to 5 days, a special ed student, but up to 10 days, a student who doesn't have a disability, with what you all could probably teach in a law school lesson, Goss versus Lopez, notice and an opportunity to be heard. So an administrator may still call in Ann and say, hey, listen, I got you on video smoking out back. And that's the presentation of the evidence the administrator has against me. And then my opportunity to be heard is when the building principal says, so what do you have to say for yourself? And that's where I say, no, that was my twin, Tasha, that wasn't me. So notice and an opportunity to be heard is still the due process protection provided anytime a student is suspended up to 10 days. Nothing about that changed, except those students have to be 11 years old or older. And you can only suspend for 5 days for the special ed student, and then only after you've contacted your director of special services to make sure that the IDEA has been complied with. For long-term suspensions of more than 10 days, including an expulsion, up even to and including a permanent expulsion, that requires by federal law more robust procedural protections. For a long time in your school district, you have managed that process by having a discipline panel hear those proposed suspensions and expulsions. It's been a panel of 3 school district employees, with the chair of the panel always being an administrator from another school. And in those hearings, students have a right to receive the evidence that will be presented before they have their hearing. They have a right to have an attorney present. Those are very formal kinds of discipline hearings. That remains the same in these procedures. It's just that we tried to consolidate and simplify and make it very clear that the very same set of procedures are required, whether it's a long-term suspension, an expulsion, a permanent expulsion. So those things remain the same. And where does the board remain included? Where do you remain involved in this process? State law says there are 4 categories of very serious misconduct that they would like your engagement in. And they are these 4 categories of misconduct. If a student commits a battery on an employee, if a student is found to be involved in the sale or distribution of controlled substances, a student who is in possession of a firearm or a dangerous weapon, or a student who has been deemed to be a habitual discipline problem because they've had at least, I think it's 5 suspensions of 3 days or more, 2 days or more, 3 days or more, and it appears now that they are just habitually being suspended. Our state law provides that they can be deemed a habitual discipline problem. What state law requires is that in the event a student for being disciplined for any of those 4 serious offenses, that the board review the circumstances and approve that discipline in accordance with your own procedures. So what does that mean logistically? It means that if any of the administrators is having a discipline hearing to hear one of those offenses, and they're proposing a long-term suspension or expulsion, if at the end of that hearing, the panel has determined that a suspension or expulsion should be imposed, then we have a mechanism in place to permit all of you to participate very quickly in a hearing. They're not subject to open meeting law. Very quickly in a hearing, and you don't rehear the case. What you do is to query the administrator and perhaps even the panel that made the decision in order to be certain that all of your procedures were followed, so that you can assure yourself that before that kind of very serious removal of the student goes forward, it satisfies you that your building administrators have complied with the procedures that you have in this regulation. So that's the engagement of the board going forward. Your opportunity to say, hey, wait a minute. I don't see here that you permitted this student to have a fair hearing and a discipline hearing. Turns out you only had 2 members of a panel, not 3, or any other kind of procedural concern that you would want to raise. And so that's what still exists in this set of procedures for you. So to summarize, the work that we've done here reflects the new age limitations that now exist in state law, with the exception of students at any age who are gen ed students found in possession of a firearm or dangerous weapon. With that exception, all other students have to be at least 11 years old to be suspended or expelled. Okay? Yeah, even a short-term suspension. These new procedures reflect the limitations on the number of days that a special education student can be suspended, which is no more than 5 days per occurrence of misconduct or a permanent expulsion. They reflect the step required to contact your director of special services to make sure we're in compliance with federal law. They streamline the procedures for those 2 major categories I talked about, short-term suspension and then long-term suspension or expulsion. And they maintain your engagement to the extent that it's required by state law at exactly the junctures where state law require that you be involved and review circumstances and approve those long-term suspensions or expulsions for those 4 very serious categories of misconduct.
So, Ian, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So, in light of our current conditions, one of the things as a restorative practice, sometimes you can't suspend a child in, below the age of 11, but you might put them in an alternative setting. They might work in a neighboring classroom with a different teacher, different set of kids to give a time away. Our schools really aren't going to be able to do that with contact tracing and the limitations we have in place. So could a principal theoretically say, okay, well, your next in-school day, we're going to change your placement, you're going to do digital learning. And maybe they're still getting their education, it's in a different setting, it's not necessarily suspension. Would that be available to the principals? Kind of like an in-school suspension type situation or an alternative setting?
I think we have to be very careful that and we'll just use an example of a 9-year-old student, that in doing that, and I don't know whether you're running hybrid days, half of your students are coming on Monday and another half coming on Tuesday.
Yes.
I believe you'd have the option to switch which day that student came, but I don't believe that you could simply say you're not permitted to be on campus anymore. You're now, by our unilateral authority, being directed to participate only in distance education. I don't think that would work, if that's what you're suggesting.
No, I was suggesting, like you said, maybe they swap a day.
Yeah, swap days.
Yeah.
I think you could do that in the same way now that we can use in-school suspensions. The critical piece here is that we have to make sure that students aren't removed from school by suspension or by expulsion in ways that they don't otherwise have a right to be at school. But no kid, I think, no student even in Carson City has a right to be there on Monday as opposed to being there on Tuesday.
Right. So, and I just want to say thank you for coming and helping with this. I gave Tasha a little bit of pushback the last time, and I had a lot of questions and concerns. And so I'm happy we found a way. I mean, I don't think it's in the kids' best interest for the school trustees to be making discipline decisions. I think that's for the site administration and our district administration when appropriate. And there's certain extreme cases when we should. So thank you for helping us get a little bit of clarification.
And if I may, I would just also say, having litigated school decisions, discipline decisions, like all the way through to the Ninth Circuit, as an attorney, you are better off not being individually involved in reviewing those facts and making those decisions. the level of board review that exists here, which is for you to be that last safeguard to say, are we complying with our procedures? That is the kind of posture you want to be in. You don't want to be named as an individual defendant in a discipline decision that was made, in my humble opinion. That doesn't usually go well. So it's better off to let your school administrators be named in those lawsuits. And then
all
as
agree.
the district, your defense is, and this is an important one, it's a very important one, we have established policies and procedures that conform to state and federal law. We train our administrators, as we'll be doing next week, on how it is that those should be implemented. And then from the district's perspective, what you're responsible for always is having policy and procedure and staff and administrators who've been trained in knowing how to implement those. And then if we make some mistake in some decision, the district itself, you named individually as decision makers is less likely. And as a board, you have a good defense for doing what you're supposed to do, which is to have policies and procedures and staff who are trained.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Rich?
I'd just like to say a very good presentation, thank you. And I just have one question, or two actually. On the first page, on the first new paragraph, when you say the law requires or charges, I'm wondering, is that you're referring to NRS, federal law, state law, county law, city law? So I'm wondering if we should put NRS charges or, instead of just the law, just make it a little bit clearer.
We'll be more specific. Thank you.
And then, and I may be reading this wrong, but on page number 4, the first paragraph, last sentence in the first paragraph, the school shall provide a plan of action. I guess when I read that, I was thinking to myself, the school as a thing. And I'm wondering, should be the school administrator, the school principal provides the plan? Instead of the school, because, when I read that, I thought, okay, the school is.
It's just
not
the
a person
humans
that's-
who are there, huh?
Pardon?
It's just the humans who are there. Right. I'm sorry.
The school is a building.
the school's a building.
Right.
Yeah.
And we need to be precise about who it is within the school who would be charged with that responsibility.
That was my thinking, yes.
Okay. And I don't know, Tasha, if you have thoughts about that. It could, those kinds of plans can be developed by more than just a building principal, and so.
School officials?
School official, maybe, because then the second paragraph also has this, if a school is unable to. So I like kind of the school official, something like that gives a little bit more flexibility.
And I
guess.
wonder what, consistency with our other policies, because I think a lot of times it's just understood that the school administration is acting on behalf of, you know what I mean? It's the policy of the school. So I would just say if the other policies say the school, instead of have one that's
Yeah, I remember other policies saying the school when it's directing something like that,
different.
but
They might just look into that.
We'll address that concern. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
thank you.
And then in that fourth paragraph there on page 4, it says 10 years or younger. Didn't you say 11 years
Okay.
when you were speaking?
Yes, so let me back up and kind of take a run at the whole sentence. In extraordinary circumstances, a school may request an exception from the board to permanently expel a student from school who is 10 or younger. In other words, not at least 11. I bring you the language of our legislators, and with apologies, but yes, it's another, 10 or younger is another way of saying not at least 11.
Just a couple questions I had as I was going through. I noticed that the page numbers repeated several times, so if you could just make that correction. And then it's the third, or the first page 12, where it's Article 8, suspensions. It seems like that contemplated, there it is. Okay, it was hanging off and I thought the sentence had ended, but now I just found it.
Okay, good.
So the next one is on the fourth page, 12, Article 11, procedures for long-term suspension and expulsions. In Section A, superintendent within the last sentence, superintendent with 2 days or as soon as practical imposing a short-term suspension. I think it should still be a long-term because the whole article is involved with long-term suspensions.
And let me explain what we mean, and we'll certainly adjust if the language isn't clear. What generally happens is that before we impose a long-term suspension, the first thing a building administrator will do is impose a short-term suspension pending the long-term. And this is an attempt to say, if you're looking, Madam Administrator, at imposing a long-term suspension or an expulsion, you need to let us know within the first 2 days of that short-term suspension. In other words, let us know early on. If you impose a short-term suspension of 10 days pending proceedings, let us know within 2 days of that short-term suspension.
Okay, so pretty much if there's a long-term suspension, there will procedurally always be a short-term suspension?
Almost always.
Okay.
Almost always.
Okay, I just was thinking, wait,
Yeah.
why did we take out long-term when it goes?
For
Thank you.
due process sakes, obviously, you want to be able to do your investigation, you want to be able to do those
Take
pieces.
a little longer to do all of the required procedures for a long-term suspension.
It does. And because in a long-term suspension or expulsion, the student has to receive a very detailed notice that advises the student of all of their rights in that regard and the ability to have counsel and everything else. So the need to be able to get those notices out in a hurry so that with any luck you can get that long-term suspension or expulsion hearing arranged before your short-term runs out. So that's the need for the heads up there.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Lupe.
So I have a question on page number 12, section E. It says, at any time on or at the school grounds when the conduct has a direct impact on the health, welfare, or safety of students or school employees. This includes conduct of the school grounds that materially and substantially disrupts school activities or causes school officials to reasonably believe that it will do so. So my concern is, are we stepping on the parents' authority to discipline their children? I'm assuming they mean over the weekend, right? At any time.
I know that you're in the section that talks about
Section-
conduct on or
Yep.
off campus, correct?
Correct.
Right. So misconduct can occur off campus that substantially disrupts on-campus events and on-campus interactions. Let me just use an example. If a student at home sends a bomb threat to the school, they've engaged in the misconduct at home, but it poses a substantial disruption potential to the school.
Okay.
And so that's all we're talking about, is that there are some kinds of behaviors that students engage in away from campus that have posed a reasonable likelihood of substantial disruption on campus.
On campus.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, better, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Trustee Ramirez, this comes into play quite a bit with cyberbullying. This is where we see this quite often. You know, most of the time, in those particular cases, students are doing it at home. They're not, posting the things usually at school, but then it has a substantial impact in the school environment, and we still address that. So
Would it
that's
be
where you see it a lot.
Would it be appropriate to include that example, something related to cyber, so that we know
Well,
that's where we're,
It wouldn't be limited to that, though. I think it's further reaching than that. It occurs, as Ms. Alexander was saying, for instance, we've had, for instance, a fight that has happened off campus, but because of the impact it's had, ramifications at school come Monday morning, and the kids are still squaring up against each other based on a fight that happened on a Saturday at the mall or something. we're still addressing those issues in the schools because it's had an impact on the school. So it's beyond cyberbullying. That's where the most of it occurs, but it does happen beyond that as well.
And I think that that's probably why, like next week when they train the administrators, like they'll talk about examples of when that's appropriate. And I guarantee you, principals know they've been dealing with this regularly.
Okay, good.
So one thing I'd like to, Tash, a few songs for the record, by the way, but I would like to also let you know next steps. As Mrs. Alexander was saying, we're going to train our administrators on Monday and Tuesday more in depth about these changes. And then we also still are required to create a board policy, a plan for restorative justice. That is actually what I brought to you last, I think it was October. So other provisions in 168 state that the progressive discipline, we used to call it progressive discipline plan, which is now a plan for restorative discipline, is now done at the district level by the board, not at each individual site. So last year, without having this in place, and that was the conversations we had, President Walker, without having an updated regulation to drive what was in that plan, it was very difficult to not have these actions working together. So by law, we have to put that plan together. We do have a base plan based on the recommendations and updates that you all gave me last year. Our schools now have to take that base plan to their site-based discipline committees, which has to have parents and staff, et cetera, on them. They have to give us feedback, and then I have to bring that to you as proposed changes before November 15th, so that we can then report to the Department of Education that we've complied with creating a district plan for restorative discipline. And then we're also required to give a copy of that plan to every employee of the district and to post it on our websites, et cetera. So last year, we kind of stalled in that, those efforts without having this piece. So again, coming back to this year, being able to, although we did put the practices, as we stated, in place, and we made sure that our employees were adhering to the law, we just didn't have the formalized, updated regulation, therefore, the updated plan for restorative discipline, and then to be able to continue on with our work in that vein. So we wanted to get this first step taken care of and make sure that we could answer the questions that you had, and then, again, be able to use this for training and then to prepare our district-wide board plan for restorative discipline.
Dawn?
Just one last minor thing that I noticed. Right before Appendix A, that last page 12, where you have Section 14, would that be Section 12, since you're taking out 12 and 13?
Thank you.
We can definitely update those. As you can tell, when we're morphing documents and adding pieces, the pagination got off, et cetera. So we will make sure that all of our Roman numerals are correct and our pages are accurate.
Well, and I'll just say, Tash, I want to say thank you to you also, and hopefully we don't get this approved and then the legislature changes it in a few months and we do this all over again.
That will happen. Yeah, that's one thing I can say with certainty here today, ladies and gentlemen.
But at least we're in compliance at this time.
And again, kudos to your administration for making sure that they were complying with the law, whether these documents were caught up or not. As your counsel pointed out earlier, complying with the law is the best defense.
All right, thank you both.
Thanks so much. My pleasure to see you all, and I wish you well as you begin a very difficult year, and I'm always here for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 8 is presentation of pass-fail data for the fourth quarter for the 2019-2020 school year. This is for discussion only. And we'll have Ricky Medina and Tasha Fuson.
Thank you, President
Yeah, are
Walker.
you all able to hear me?
I was just going to let you know that Dr. Medina is joining us via Zoom. Go ahead, Dr. Medina.
Yeah, Ricky Medina for the record. Yeah, I'm going to present, you should have received two documents in your packets. One of the documents is for middle school. The other document is for the two high schools. And I just want to point out there's a couple of differences between the way that credits and classes are handled at the middle school and high school level. So first off, at the middle school level, the students only have to earn credits in social studies, math, English, and science. The elective credits per NRS, they're not required to earn those credits in order for promotion. So rather than just put the number of credits that students earned, I'm covering the number of classes that students were actually enrolled in, so that way we don't leave out all of those electives. Another difference between the two is at the middle school level, the grades are year-long. So when you get a quarter grade, those are progress grades, and at the end of the year, you get a final grade. So that results in there being more grades kind of stored in the grade book for the individual middle schools. So if you were there for 2/3 of the year, chances are you're going to be rewarded credit at the middle school. Whereas at the high school, if you were in another district, if you weren't there long enough, you might not get Carson High credit. You might get credit from that other school. The other difference at the high school, the credits are rewarded by semester. So rather than grades lasting the whole year, I'm only showing you semester 2 grades. The one last thing I'll point out before I explain what the data is you might notice, like when you look at Carson Middle School, there was a drop from like 20,000 credits that were awarded, or 20,000 classes that were awarded to 17,500. That wasn't us offering, it was us offering less classes, because at the middle school, sometimes you have things like homeroom or shortened classes. So the schedules have changed over the years, the number of classes that are available. So the two documents that you have, what's included on them, the blue bars, that's the number of classes that were passed. The red bar are the number of classes where the student received either a failing grade or an incomplete grade, or the grade was withheld for some reason, a medical reason, the student ended up in the hospital and never came back. The pass rate is the pass rate for each of those years. So starting with spring of 2018, spring of 2019, spring of 2020. So if you look at the pass rates for Carson Middle and Carson High School, the numbers are down by a percentage. I would say they're pretty much relatively the same. For Pioneer High School, their pass rate over the years has gone down a little bit, as well as Eagle Valley Middle School. But the high schools have already, this is part of the data that they look at. It's part of some of the data that's collected for the grant at Pioneer High School. For the middle schools, they'll be getting this data. Usually they would have already gotten this data, but because we're trying to get the school year opened, they'll get this data next week, and they'll also be able to look at it for their different subtops or by whatever different kind of breakdowns it is that they want to view. So that being said, any questions?
Yeah, Dr. Medina, Joe Casiopo, thanks for the information. You somewhat answered my question. I was looking at the data and seeing how, while it's pretty close, it is trending down across the board for both high schools and both middle schools. And my original question was going to be, how concerned should we be about this as far as the trend goes? And I'm assuming we'll get some updates once the site administrators get a chance to look at this data to give us their strategy, their perspective and their strategies of what we're going to do to level it out or hopefully reverse the trend. So I guess my question is, the simple question is, from a district level, how concerned are we about the trend down across the board?
Yeah, so when I look at the data, first off, I would stress that last year was kind of a super anomaly. So it's hard for me to say that there's kind of a trend one way or the other. Because I think last year, with the pandemic hitting, that had an impact on our schools. But what I am interested in looking at is as we go through, especially at the middle schools, at the quarter, and at the high school at the first semester, as we get closer to those, making sure that our pass rates are up where they were back in 2018, not where they currently are now.
Tasha Fuson for the record. Again, I'd like to kind of weigh in on this too. I can tell you, obviously, as the former principal of Carson High School, that we watch this data quite closely. And really what ends up happening is that there's so many indicators that we're really judged on under the Nevada School Performance Framework. That one of the things that we used to do with our schools is we'd provide them their pass-fail rates on a regular basis to say this, kept trying to push to make sure 90% of the kids passed, except that was like a big thing that we'd focus on. In the last couple of years, we've kind of shifted our focus more to looking at ACT, level of rigor in the classes. Are we preparing our students for that college and career readiness benchmark? And to the point where we stopped spending as much time on the pure compliance of the passing of the credits, right? Passing of the credits is one thing, because this data doesn't show when it says that there's a 92.4% pass rate. It doesn't show if those are all kids getting Ds, or are they getting A's, B's, and C's, right? So we really were focusing as a district on pure compliance of passing, which is not a bad thing. It really made our teachers think about, okay, are we making sure that we're going out and talking to parents and talking to students if they have missing grades, because most of the time when a student's failing, it's not because the student's doing poorly on the work, it's because the student's not turning in work. Now, why is the work not being turned in? That's a different question. But when we start instead focusing on what is the level of rigor of the course, are we preparing our students to take those high stakes tests? It's a different shift. It's a different focus. So that's part of what I know happened at Carson High, and I know through the conversations with our other principals, that's part of what's occurring here. But it's definitely, I don't think we're at a point where I'm concerned about pass rates, because our students actually have the opportunity to take many more classes at the high school level than they're required for graduation. What I'm more concerned about is the depth of what classes are they taking? Are they taking the courses that they need to be college and career ready? Are they taking them at an appropriate level of rigor? Are their scores on ACT and college entrance exams going up? Is their participation in AP? Those other things, rather than just a compliance pass-fail. I do think it's remarkable, however, and I want to point out that, as Dr. Medina stated, in our district for the fourth quarter, we did not stop teaching kids, right? So they went on remote learning, and we continued teaching new materials. We continued going through our standards and teaching our standards. Other districts, one to the south, got a lot of pushback in the news, and I know everyone saw that, because in essence, they stopped teaching at the end of third quarter. And what they did all of fourth quarter was fill in the blanks and have kids do missing assignments. There wasn't any teaching. So as my sister was an administrator down south, was a principal, and she shared with me how frustrated her staff was, because in Clark County, there was zero reason for you not to have an A++++, because you could do everything over and over and over again until you got an A, because for 9 weeks, there was not new instruction going on. That is not what happened in Carson City. So the fact that our students were able to acquire new learning, be exposed to new standards, new materials, et cetera, and still pass their classes at this rate is actually quite impressive, in my opinion. I think it's a testament to how hard our teachers did work at the secondary levels especially, so did our elementary. But here's the data that we have specifically for secondary. And it shows that they were able to keep pulling the kids along.
Well,
Right?
and I was just going to say, I think it would be kind of challenging because we did go to a pass-fail at the end of the year, which is not typical. And so I think that just all around, it's going to take us a couple of years really to see if those trends are trends or what. I mean, it's such unique circumstances. I just don't know how do we wrap our head around it and really gauge, because like you said, these kids passing with a D minus? You know what I mean? We just don't know qualitatively or even quantitatively what these results mean.
Yeah, and this year will be a little bit off as well, because I think that one of the challenges this year is going to be getting kids to school. So not only getting kids to pass, but also we're going to have to spend a lot of kind of time and energy making sure that students feel safe and comfortable coming back to school.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I agree. We're in a challenging time going forward, and trends are, it's going to be hard to track a trend any farther until we get back to normal. I just know, we have these conversations regularly, and we look at test data and all that stuff, and it is hard to, it's very hard to get like ACT data to jump up quick. And so while I appreciate and I acknowledge that we don't want to just look at pass rates, I agree with you, how many A's, how many B's, that kind of thing. I just want to make sure, and I know we are, that we're looking at this and going, okay, are we doing what we can to keep moving them forward and trying to get them back to an upward trend. But I appreciate that. Thank you.
I think Richard and then you, Laurel.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, is this information for 18, 19, and 20 just for the last quarter, or is that for the whole year, school year?
Yeah, so for middle school, their grades are year-long grades. So that grade is for the whole entire year. For the high schools, they're on a semester system, so these grades are their second semester.
Yeah, because I guess what I was curious about last time we talked about this is, once we went to the pass-fail grading system, how many kids actually failed versus passed?
So grades are not calculated in that manner. It's very, very difficult to carve that out, because that's what Dr. Medina is trying to explain. At the high school level, for instance, at Carson High School, the second semester grade isn't broken down between third quarter and fourth quarter. So you can't just pull out a fourth quarter grade and say, this is, did you fail fourth quarter or pass fourth quarter? It is accumulation of the entire semester. So we can't pull data that way. It just isn't represented that way, isn't able to be looked at. It has to be looked at the semester.
All right, thank you.
Just my thinking when we went to the pass-fail and knowing that students had difficulty accessing, and some had difficulty, it just was surprising to me to see that our pass rate actually decreased. And I know it's not by much, but that does give me concern, because I thought the shift to the pass-fail was to not do any harm to students, to help them in the difficult situation that we were in this fourth quarter. And perhaps it's just an anomaly this 1 year, but it seems to me that the goal of pass-fail was to give students every benefit that they're trying, and whether or not, I know missing assignments is often why kids have the lower grades, is the missing assignments. And, if perhaps things weren't accepted or anything like that, that concerns me a little bit, because my thought was with what happened in fourth quarter, we were trying to give them every opportunity to.
We were, but they still had to engage. So if you sat at home for fourth quarter and did not engage, did not do any work, did not communicate with teachers, did not sign up for classes, we also weren't about just handing out grades that weren't worth anything or credit that didn't reflect anything. So our motto was, yes, do no harm, but that meant we said to our teachers, if the student needs to take a picture of their homework on their phone and send it in to you versus uploading it to Google, let them do that. If you need to call the student and the student needs to tell you verbally the answers to this quiz or assessment, you're going to let them do that. But they still have to do something, right? Like, we didn't pass kids just for breathing. They actually had to engage in education. And unfortunately, we had some students who did not, and so some families who did not. And then we had to address that in a different way. We had to address that through wraparound services, through contacting parents, truancy letters, that kind of thing. So that is part of this. So we did have challenges with some of our students choosing not to engage in education at all.
I'm just guessing, but I'm expecting of course, we're gonna have some of that this semester and this year as well, but I am concerned. That was one of the things that haunts me with these kids that are in a daycare setting or some kind of setting where they can't get their work done the way we're hoping they will get it done. And I'm wondering how I'm not asking a question now, but I am curious how we're gonna track that and make heads or tails of that. A kid who wants to do his work, but for some reason, he's not going to get it done during the normal school day versus a kid who said, "Ah, the heck with it, I'd rather go ride my skateboard."
I can tell you, in terms of our community partners, we had a recent meeting with the leads of many of our community partnership groups, Boys and Girls Club for one, et cetera. They're being wonderful partners in terms of helping us plan and having communication. To respond to one of the questions earlier, our students K through 12 will receive devices that will go home with them. We do have digital curriculum. And so our community partners have really put forth the desire to support our students while they're in their programs on their opposite days from school, to support them and having them do their work during those days. We've had many parents who've called us and said, on my student's off day, I will be helping my child after dinner. Do I have access to this? So we've been problem solving that with families so that we can try to make sure we provide every opportunity for students on their remote learning days to have that support that they need.
I think that maybe one of the things that would be helpful is just, as administrators kind of work through the data from this year, maybe for the next time we have a report, maybe multiple measures or different ways to show that, because we're not going to necessarily have our SBAC scores or ACT scores. So there's going to be a black hole. That's one of the things I just mentioned to Joe. For probably the next couple of years, we're going to be missing pieces of data. And so maybe it'd be helpful for us to just kind of get a couple different ways of how the school knows that the kids are progressing. So, I mean, just a thought, and I don't know what that would be. I think that that's kind of, as you guys are putting your heads together and doing your PLCs, it's what are those pieces of evidence that you're confident are helpful to show students are progressing? Because I think that we're going to all be struggling here for the next little bit, trying to show that we're effectively meeting the needs of these kids.
I understand that you couldn't pull the data for just a 9-week period of time for who passed the bill. But I guess what I was hoping for is to see how many kids actually did not engage, like you said, and just failed for that reason. What percentage was it, 10%, 15%? And that's what I was kind of getting at, because we're going to be doing remote learning for a period of time in one fashion or another. And if we have a group of kids who are just not engaging, I guess I was just trying to get a feel for how many cases like that there may have been during that period of time.
Thanks.
I will do my best to figure out how to provide you data on what you're requesting. I don't know the answer to that right at this moment, because those are all handled in different ways. Again, if a student is failing to engage in the educational environment, we go through truancy procedures with them. We send truancy notices out. They often go to SARB, et cetera. So there's different means to address that versus a pass-fail rate. But I'll do my best to try to
And that, I
figure
appreciate
out
that, but
data for you.
because I've heard stories, I think we all did, about where a teacher would have a Zoom meeting with a class, and out of 20 students, 4 would show up for the Zoom meeting. And so I was just trying to get a feel for how many kids were not really engaging and passed anyway, or didn't engage and didn't pass. Because like I said earlier, we're going to be doing this remote learning for quite a while, it looks like. And I think we got to get a handle on how we get those kids engaged, and what do we do to the kids that don't engage. instead of letting him, 16 students not participate in a class and only 4 participate in a class, and then if all 20 passed, that's not really fair to the 4 students who are attending all the classes.
So, Richard, I'm just wondering, are you wanting them to go back and look at last year, or are you wanting evidence for engagement this year, which I think would be probably more helpful?
I think this year, it would probably be hard to do it for last year, but at least maybe this year if we could do something.
And that would be what
Yeah,
I would
and
want.
what,
Go ahead, Doctor.
yeah, and what I was going to say was if last year's data, the way that the pandemic hit, there weren't quality like attendance procedures that were able to be put in place under such short notice. And so a lot of the data that you're talking about for last year would be at the individual sites. This year, since the pandemic hit, ourselves, the Nevada Department of Ed, Infinite Campus have been working together to try to build a system so that we can get more granular with the data that we're collecting for attendance. So, for example, the kids that are, when they're there in seat, we're going to take attendance the same exact way. For kids that aren't in seat, that are attending virtually, there will be other attendance codes that we'll be able to track. Did the student attend class that day, like virtually? Was it through a teacher phone call that they were marked? So this year we'll have that finer, granular detail, so we'll be able to determine which kids are engaging and in which ways.
And that's kind of my reasoning is it's okay to say classes, but is this 5 kids that didn't pass any of their classes?
Stacy, will you make sure your mic's on or move your microphone a little closer?
It's on.
Thank
Green
you.
light. I didn't pull a source. That's what Andrew would say too. No, I'm just trying to, when we say there are 645 classes that failed, is that like 10 kids that didn't go to, is it like a group of kids? Or like you said, is it a class that everybody had problems with or something? I'd like more of a breakdown that way to know what this really means. Because, I mean, it's interesting data, but we just don't know if it's because the pass rate went down because people didn't engage, or the classes were harder, or, there's so many variables here that it's hard to pinpoint what this data is really telling us.
As Dr. Medina said, we can absolutely do that this year moving forward. I apologize. We were simply asked to put together information on pass-fail rates, so we did. But we absolutely will dive in and do it more granularly moving forward. We're happy to come back. And as we look at perhaps first quarter or first semester grades and give you more of a feedback on how many students failed compared to how many days absence they had, et cetera. If that's what I'm hearing, that you're really looking more for, as a comparison of who's passing and attending versus who's passing and not attending versus who's not attending and failing, and et cetera. So we absolutely can look at that more at that level. And as Dr. Medina said, with the Department of Education coming out with much more succinct direction on how we're to take attendance in this new hybrid model for remote learning as well as our hybrid students, we can absolutely bring it back disaggregated in that manner.
And I don't think we're real clear, so I don't think we were sure exactly how we were asking for the data either. And I think that really when we look at this with so many kids doing digital learning, it's really challenging because no matter when a teacher schedules a Zoom meeting, some of those kids are not going to be available to get on a computer right then. And so I think that's why when we really look at the data, we have to look at, were they on those types of interactive meetings with their teachers? Were they emailing? Did they turn in work through the Google Classroom? I mean, any of those are ways families are allowed to engage with the teacher and count as attendance. And so we might even just want a breakdown of how did those families engage, because there's a lot of people who can't get on those Zoom meetings, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not engaged. And so I think that we would need the full picture just so that we know what is the rate of engagement with our students.
But at that same time, I don't want to get so down in the weeds that it's taking time away from other projects that are more educational, feeding the students' needs too. I'm hoping that staff can find a balance there. And if there's something that we're asking that you have to go too deep into the weeds, I think you should just tell us that's just too deep. Don't spend, hours and hours trying to find out answers to these questions. It's just a matter of what data that you could pull out of there that might make it helpful for educators and the board to realize how we can help these kids and get them additional support, I think is what we basically want to know. I don't want them to spend, 6 months on this for things that they should be doing otherwise too.
Well, I think our schools, we're required to keep this information for attendance purposes, correct?
Break it down the way we've asked in such minute detail sometimes.
Correct. I think that's what it is right now we could go back to the schools, but there's 500 teachers and each teacher is keeping their individual records. So to take individual 500 records, put them together to aggregate that, to come in here and give you feedback would be a challenge. It would be time consuming, quite a few man hours. However, moving into this year, as Dr. Medina stated, one of the benefits to working with the Department of Education and obviously the Department of Ed, knowing that all districts are in the same boat, part of what President Walker is stating is that now we're going to have within Infinite Campus, our students who are on 100% remote learning will be separated out into a separate cohort. So we could give you data based on our students who are in the remote learning classroom in terms of pass, fail, and attendance reflecting engagement, versus our students in the hybrid program and how they are doing in terms of passing, failing, or letter grade breakouts, and attendance is attached to that. That would be not a difficult task for us to be able to pull that information out and bring it here and share that with you so that you could see, like I said, attendance versus grades and different types of learning programs. We absolutely could do that.
I appreciate that. I think there's so many factors, like we said, you could really get into the weeds on it. I do want to get a little into the weeds, but not so much that it's a new department that was, to do this thing. Because I'm even curious, and I don't know how you do it, it might even be harder, is we have a lot of great community partners out there. But I'm curious, what it's going to look like, and are we going to see that some community partners, daycares, et cetera, did a much better job facilitating this for our students than others did? And that might be useful information as well.
And I think we just have to remember that we're the school board, so if we ask the staff to get us data, they're going to get us data. So we want to be clear, if we're asking for it, they're going to get it for us. So if we're wanting a real surface level, I think that should be our request, because it's hard for them to try to discern, because then we've all sat through meetings where we're grilling, well, I guess it was Mrs. Kima, and you know what I mean? There were some contentious meetings, so I think that, I just don't want to make it vague for them, because they're going to try to get that information for us.
I agree, and I think what Ms. Fuson said, the information you could easily provide, that would do for me for now.
So item number 9, informational update on the nutrition program in the Carson City School District to include breakfast in the classroom. This is for discussion only, and we have Elizabeth Snyder and Andrew Fueling. Mr. Fueling, how are you doing this evening?
Doing well, sir. Thank you for asking. Good evening, trustees. Mr. Pym, why don't you come and take a seat? This evening, AJ Fueling for the record. This evening, I have our Director of Nutrition Services, Elizabeth Snyder, with us, and our brand spanking new dining director with Chartwells, Mr. Dan Pym, to talk a little bit about a number of board meetings ago. There was a question about the breakfast in the classroom program, so coming back with some information about that. And then kind of, as long as we were going to talk about that, I thought you may be interested to know a little bit about what we're planning on nutrition for the year, just as you're getting questions, so you have some information on that. So
Mr. Fueling, I think it's a little difficult to, you might put the microphone a little closer.
Okay.
Just saying.
Yep. Sorry, Renee.
Don't make the boss mad.
I know. Okay, let's try this again. There we go. So just a little start to breakfast in the classroom, and then I'll defer to Elizabeth. So breakfast in the classroom as a more along the lines of a requirement under certain circumstances started in 2015. In that session, Senate Bill 503, known as the Breakfast After the Bell bill, was strongly supported by Governor Sandoval and made its way through the legislature and signed. And basically, if a school has more than 70% of the students that qualify for free and reduced lunch, breakfast in the classroom or breakfast after the bell is actually required. So that is some of our schools, not all of our schools. However, school districts may add that program to any school, so it's at district discretion. If the free and reduced rate is less than 70%. So currently, we run that program at Empire, Mark Twain, and Fremont elementary schools. And then for next year, as a part of the agreement with Chartwells, we're expanding that to Bordewick, Fritch, and Seeliger elementaries. And mostly because I can't help myself, I thought this would be interesting just to see the free and reduced rates over with a 10-year difference. And I wish that 2010 is the furthest back I have this data. It'd be interesting, I think, to see, because we were kind of in the depths of the recession at that point, to go back to say like 05, which is a bit of a more normalized year. But at least in contrast of what was a really bad year in 2010 to what we have today. When I arrived in 2014, I think our district-wide rate was like 56%. So we're actually kind of where we've been for the last 6 years. But just interesting to see some of the change over time.
Hey, AJ.
Yeah.
I get some questions periodically about the cost of the district. I know you've addressed this before, but without a whole lot of detail. Adding all the schools into this, what kind of cost of the district is it?
So I'm gonna try to answer some of that, and then what if you think I missed something, go ahead. And actually, Mr. Pim, you may want to add in as well. So there is cost to the district in terms of buying more food, right? Clearly, we're providing more meals. I believe for the most part, we can do it without necessarily adding additional labor costs. That seems correct, right? So it's really more costs on the supply side, or supplying food, and then making sure that if we're getting, are expecting that between federal reimbursements and what students pay towards breakfast, that it at least covers the cost of the food that is being provided. That's accurate. Okay. Yep, that's perfect. Yes. Okay. All right. So I will now defer to Elizabeth, who has a little more expertise in this process. So you can use your mic, and Dan.
Hello, Mr. President and Board, and Mr. Stokes, thank you so much for having us here today. Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so AJ gave a pretty succinct example of what breakfast in the classroom is, or explanation of it. It's basically just any time that children get a chance to eat after the bell rings, so after the start of the day. There's a lot of different models, and every model works a little better at different sites. So for example, Mark Twain and Fremont, their sister schools, they have completely different models because they work better at their sites. This is a chance for late arrivals to get breakfast, which is huge, especially on some days where transportation might be an issue because of inclement weather or something like that. And you can see on the slide that it increases participation by quite a bit. Part of that is because it destigmatizes school meals. For some reason, studies have shown that eating breakfast at school kind of marks you as a poor kid. It's very, very stigmatized. Breakfast in the classroom helps with that because everybody's participating. And that's something that's huge. So Mark Twain, between school year 1819 and 1920, when we implemented breakfast in the classroom, we saw participation go up by 59%. And at Fremont, we saw an increase of 55% participation. And that just makes my heart sore because that means that kids are nourished. And when kids are well nourished, oh, that's a later slide. They have better behavior, they're more attentive, test grades go up, they have better participation in class, there's less behavioral referrals to the office. And then, so that's how it affects kids. Sorry, I kind of skipped around there a little bit.
Elizabeth, can I ask, so we're only adding it into the elementaries. Was there discussion or is there plans to eventually add in the middle schools?
So we have not spoken about that yet. It's a bit more complicated at middle schools. And I don't think it quite increases participation as much in the secondary level. But that is something that we'll probably look at in the future, depending on how well it goes. Something that was left out of the slide on accident is Pioneer High School does have a breakfast after the bell program because they are CEP, meaning everybody eats for free. That stands for Community Eligibility Provision. So we offer breakfast at the traditional time, and then also during their first period, a breakfast cart goes around, and kids are allowed a second chance to get breakfast if they didn't arrive on time. Impact to instruction for breakfast in the classroom. If it's taken as an opportunity, it can be very minimal, and it can actually be really beneficial to class. It gives the teachers time to take attendance. Many different like math and science prompts can be included in it, or they can do a journal prompt about what's your favorite breakfast item and why. Something as simple as that. Something else that we wanted to cover while we have your attention are some USDA waivers for this school year that are very, very helpful to our operation. So USDA waivers that have been extended for school year 1920 include a mealtime waiver, meaning that we can serve kids at home, basically, that we don't have to make sure that they're eating between 11 and 11:20, for example. The non-congregate feeding waiver also helps with that. It means we can send meals home with students for days that they're distance learning. The meal pattern waiver, we don't really need to worry about, thankfully. That's more for rural districts that are more rural than us that may have limited access to certain things like milk that are part of the requirements. And then the parent guardian meal pickup waiver is very helpful because, because generally the student has to be present. When students are distance learning, that's very difficult for them to get away sometimes to come get a meal. But with this, the parents can come pick up as long as they provide like a report card or student ID or something identifying that they actually do have a student. Something that's going to be, yes.
So one thing I just wanted to point out, and because I think you may get questions about it, is that, so the program that we were allowed to run in the spring, where we had sites set up, we were using Boys and Girls Club, partner Ron Wood, our partners at Ron Wood, serving meals for free to anybody, or any child 18 years of age and under. That we don't have that ability anymore. So that goes away when the school year starts. So if you'd get any concerns from the public about, why can't my 2-year-old, his brother's in school, why can't my 2-year-old get meals? That those waivers have gone away. So it's really just these ones that we're working with now.
Yes, thank you. AJ took the words right out of my mouth. No, you're fine. So in the spring semester, technically we transitioned to the summer feeding program under USDA. And because district-wide we have a percent of 52 free and reduced students, we can feed everybody 18 and under for free. So that was amazing. once school starts on August 24th, we no longer have access to that waiver. The USDA has not extended it for the National School Lunch Program. As much as I've been praying and crossing my fingers and my toes and my eyes and everything else, it has not been passed. I'm still hoping that it will be, but I'm not holding my breath any longer. So that, as Mr. Fueling said, is why we can't serve everybody 18 and under anymore. Any questions on that?
If we have breakfast in the classroom and they're not on free and reduced lunch, are they getting, in their distance learning, would somebody just pick up breakfast?
We'll actually be covering that in just a few slides. Yes, thank you. No, you're good. So, all right, so next school year 2021, is going to look slightly different. We're going to make as few changes as possible. So at Empire, Mark Twain, and Fremont, which are all provision schools, meaning everybody can eat for free there, we're going to have free breakfast offered in the classroom, which we're already doing. We're going to have free lunch in the cafeteria, socially distanced. And for next day meals, and this is going to be the same at all sites, just to let you guys know, the teachers are going to ask students during attendance if they would like meals for the next day. So for group 1, on Tuesday morning, the teacher is going to take attendance and she's going to say, who needs a meal? And then she's going to, for the provision schools, because we don't care exactly who's getting the meals because they all eat for free, she'll say, I need 5 meals, and she'll send that to the kitchen. And then at the end of the day, my staff in the kitchen will drop off 5 meals at the door of the classroom before they leave. And then that teacher will pass them out so that they will be going home with those meals. We'll have mostly shelf-stable items, as many as we possibly can, so that time is not a concern. Obviously, safety is our top priority. So at Bordewick, Seeliger, and Fritch, who are not provision, and we do have to ring students up by their free and reduced status, breakfast will be offered to students as they enter the building. There will be lunch in the cafeteria. The only difference is that they will be rung up, like I said, according to their free and reduced or paid status. And again, next day meals will be addressed in the same manner.
Question about that. So, sometimes kids might say they don't want meals, but their mom and dad want them to have meals.
Yeah.
Is there a way for a parent to opt them in so they know they're always going to get those meals the next day?
If a parent can call our office, we would absolutely figure out a way to take care of that.
I think
Yes.
that'd be great because some kids just don't pay attention.
Yeah, definitely. And we also plan on having a couple prepared in the kitchen. My staff usually leaves about 2 or 2:30, depending on the site. So we're planning on usually having like 1 or 2 extras in the kitchen just in case. It's just if we do 1 or 2 extra to every class, that comes to quite a big waste. So Carson Middle School, Eagle Valley Middle, and Carson High. Breakfast will be offered in the cafeteria, lunch in the cafeteria, socially distanced. So that's the only change, is the socially distanced. The only change is the next day meals will be picked up in the cafeteria on the way out. And I've spoken with Dr. Conley and Mr. Sadler and Mr. Chambers, and the bell schedule will work out, that they will have more than enough time between the bell ringing and getting to the bus to grab meals. So Pioneer, almost exactly the same thing. Everybody eats for free. They have the second chance breakfast, and then the meals will be picked up in the cafeteria before the child leaves for the day. So for 100% distance learners, this is something that we've really been scratching our head about, to be honest. We don't believe, after a lot of thought and looking into numbers from last spring, we don't believe that a lot of 100% online learners will take advantage of school meals as much as we would love them to. So we have decided that the best way to address that would be on a case-by-case basis. I hope that I am proved wrong and that we have to come up with a pickup location on Mondays, because that's our backup plan. But for the time being, if families call our office at 283-2150, we'll be handling that on a case-by-case basis for the time being. And then did anybody have any questions for me?
I have a question probably for Mr. Stokes. You know, Mr. Stokes, if we do get to a point where we have pickup stations or we end up with a school shut down again and students are walking to get meals, are we going to work with the sheriff's office so we don't have a repeat of what happened last spring with that child that was walking up to get their meals?
We will always attempt to err on the side of student safety. And so, yes, we would be working with the sheriff's office, our school resource officers to help prevent any of those kinds of difficulties.
And I'm thinking we could probably repurpose staff like bus drivers that might not be driving students to school, maybe stationed along common pathways, or I just want to get some adults out there looking out for some of these kids if that circumstance comes about again.
Yes, absolutely. And I have been working with Ms. Fletcher since March. We've been talking at least once or twice a week, it seems, and she has been so extremely helpful, and her staff has been just amazing in transportation. So I don't think that'll be a problem.
I was wondering, I know there's probably regulations against it, but I'm wondering what you do with the food that's not eaten, that's maybe wrapped.
So
Is there any possibility of giving it to a homeless shelter, or, because we got about 300 people living on the street here in Carson at any given time.
Right. So we do work closely with the USDA, and we have in the past donated leftovers to fish. So that's typically where they go. So for example, if we've got a 3-day weekend and nobody wanted the ham sandwich on a Friday, we'll give the remaining ones to fish. And that's what I'm expecting to do this year as well. We also have a great partnership with Boys and Girls Club. So I'm going to be talking to the USDA to see if we can provide meals for them. I know that they are looking into ways to provide meals to the children that will be attending Boys and Girls Club on days that they're distance learning. So I'm hoping we can continue that relationship.
That'd be great.
Oh, first of all, I want to thank you. I think, having Chartwell's on board is exciting, and making sure we have these kids fed is very important. We always get some people that say, why are we doing this? Why are we spending money for this stuff? And I know national data certainly supports this, as do I. But I guess my question may be for AJ. At some later time, it might be nice if we could have maybe some data to support that, based on what we're seeing in our district, this is the benefit from it. So that I think you could win over some naysayers by saying, look, we're not just talking about this. We have data to back it up here locally.
Absolutely. We're actually at a bit of an interesting point because we have clear data with 3 buildings that have had breakfast in the classroom going and 3 that have never had it. And so to compare that, and also, we have, this unique COVID hybrid circumstance going on. So maybe even 2 with the kids that are 100% online versus the ones that actually are in school on some days. And yeah, we could certainly try to pull some of that. If Dr. Medina is listening, you should write that on your list. But that would be really interesting to see.
And I think we've had that proven by just our star ratings going up at those 3 schools that have that breakfast in the classroom. I think that's data pretty much targeted to that.
Yes.
And that kind of data is great. Just any kind of data that, you can, we have current data that says, hey, here's the benefit to it. Because, right now, given an election year, there's people that are looking for,
Well,
some aren't happy out there.
And actually, when AJ approached me with this board agenda, I asked him, I said, do you want me to put together, I have a PowerPoint already about the benefits of breakfast in the classroom, because I'm all about nutrition. That's been my life for many, many years now. So getting people fed and well fed is just a huge, huge thing to me. So I can definitely put together something for you guys for a future meeting.
AJ, I have a question for you. Are the parents informed about this services that are rendered by the school? Are the parents informed that their children are going to get free lunch? And just to piggyback on President Walker's comment, children, especially little ones, are not going to know whether or not to request a meal for the next day. So will the parents be notified that that is an option?
Yes, thank you, Trustee Ramirez. So we are working on getting communication out. We have a little bit of information in the FAQ on the district website. I'm putting together one this week that will go up on the nutrition page of our website. And we're also looking at putting together a robocall or an email blast, or possibly both in English and Spanish, so that everybody will be covered by that. Also, as far as free or reduced status individually and at CEP schools, families do get letters in their preferred language. So they are aware of that.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah.
So since this is an update on the nutrition program, and Dan, thank you for coming. We appreciate you being here, and welcome to the district. Would you kind of give us an update? When we first did this, we had a lot of fear in the district of employees, and so maybe you could just tell the board what you guys have done to get the introduction going and get started, and how you may have softened those fears.
Well, thank you, and I do appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm very happy to be part of the Carson City School District family, and I'm here to help enhance and support the already fine job that the Nutrition Services Department is doing. As far as the employees, we've gone around and met as many as we can, but we have a number of days of training planned, starting on Friday, and then all week next week with the employees. We also brought on an executive chef who's been in I think he's been in his chair, 3 weeks? Mm-hmm. So he brings a lot of knowledge, a lot of culinary knowledge to the school district, as do I. But we're hoping to use that knowledge to enhance the abilities of the people that are already in staff.
Go ahead, Laurel.
Just one more comment that I think applies to the 3 elementary schools where breakfast after the bell will be added in the classroom this year, because those are not fully paid breakfast. So you're going to have about half of the students in each class who will have to pay it. I live in a house full of hobbits who routinely like to eat second breakfast. So I'm thinking that would be good to let parents know, because I'm going to have a kid sitting there going, whoa, that looks good. I want to eat that too. So just to make sure we're aware how to keep it, because he'll go ahead and order, and then I'll find out I have charges after the fact. So let us know how that goes, and it may be interesting whether or not you're making guys. No, not about it. They do. They eat continuously. So
We're just saying we know that's true. We're boys.
Yep, that's what they are. So just to do that, and I guess my other question would be for those classes, since the free breakfasts aren't after the bell, are not for all students, will students be able to bring a breakfast from home if and to have at the same time, if that's an option that they want?
Yes, thank you. Those are excellent questions. To address the second one first, so I don't forget it, that is not part of the program, having kids bring their own breakfast. Although we could look into the regulations behind that, but I think that would depend more on each principal and the administration at each site if they want to allow that or not. As far as the first question goes, because we all know kids do that, they say, oh, pizza, I like pizza, even though their parents pack them a lunch. The way that we've handled it with lunch is the way we can also handle it with breakfast. If parents contact us and let us know that they don't want their children getting school meals for whatever reason, we flag that account. So if the child does try to come through, they're told, sorry, your parent said no, basically. And it is being put out in every communication. I am trying to make it very clear that at Bordewick, Seeliger, and Fritch, the paid, free, and reduced statuses will be rung up according to those. I'm repeating that until my face is blue because I do want to make sure that that's clear. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the update. We know that there's a lot of questions, and we know that you're still trying to get your feet on the ground and get to know the district. So we're happy to have you on board, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Item number 10, information, update, and discussion on staff safety protocols and return to school. This is for discussion only, and we'll welcome Ann Sear. Good evening, Ann. How are you doing today?
Well, good evening, trustees and President Walker. I am pleased to provide this informational update to you this evening as we prepare to safely open our schools. Many of the protocols that I'll be describing this evening come out of our pandemic response plan, as well as the Quad County COVID-19 outbreak response plan, which is a document that we were just provided with yesterday afternoon. So just keep in mind that many of these protocols are somewhat fluid, and they are updated and changed as we receive new direction from the Carson City Health Department. Clicker, please. Here we go. So our emergency operations plan, as you all know, is a document that is reviewed annually by our district's Emergency Operations Development Committee. And Trustee Cassiopo is a member of that committee this year. That committee convened in June and reviewed the All Hazards Emergency Operation Plan as well as the Pandemic Flu Plan. So that Pandemic Flu Plan is not specific to COVID-19. It's a generalized plan that allows us to prepare and respond to any type of pandemic situation. So the types of action steps that you find in that plan are a bit generalized. More specific guidance that we have regarding specific protocols that we would implement for response to our current COVID-19 pandemic generally come from our local health department as well as the state health department. So with regard to pandemic events, these are events that are global in nature. We have epidemic events, community outbreaks, and then pandemic events. So you find in our emergency operations plan, this pandemic response plan, because it typically will involve the coordination of federal resources and FEMA involvement. And so you see that FEMA response built into the emergency operations plan, whereas things such as norovirus, pertussis, hepatitis, these are addressed in our school health policies and are more local in nature in terms of how we address those protocols and why you wouldn't find those in the emergency operations plan. Just a brief history of pandemic influenza in our country. We, of course, are all aware of the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. This is the one that most people are really focusing on right now because it has a lot of similarity in terms of transmission and community spread, global spread, to the current pandemic. In the 1918 pandemic, there were at least 50 million people affected worldwide and 675,000 in the United States. And then in 1957, we had a year-long pandemic involving the H2N2 virus. That affected 1.1 million worldwide and 116,000 in the United States. In 1968, we had the H3N2 virus, and that affected 1 million people worldwide and about 100,000 in the US. And then most recently in 2009, we had the H1N1 pandemic. which involved 60.8 million cases and 12,469 deaths. So that just gives you an idea of kind of how these pandemic cycles move through time. And there is some thought in the health community that these types of pandemics are emerging more frequently. And so it is becoming more important that we have pandemic response plans in place to be prepared for those. The current virus that we are dealing with is the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And for those of you who are not familiar with what all those little acronyms mean, the SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. COVID is the coronavirus, and 2 is the strain of the virus. So that's the name of the virus, and it causes a disease that we call COVID-19. And as of August 9th, there were 722,285 deaths worldwide and 161,842 in the US. That number is currently forecasted by the CDC models to rise to the level of somewhere between 175,000 and 190,000 by the end of August. So if we look at those numbers that I just showed you under the historic pandemic influenza here, and those numbers and what we have going on with the SARS-CoV-2 virus kind of gives you an idea of how this compares to other pandemics in the history of our country. Some of you might be curious as to about what happened with SARS-CoV-1 and why we never talk about that so much. That was an epidemic, not a pandemic. The epidemic of SARS affected 26 countries and resulted in more than 8,000 cases in 2003. With the response to that virus epidemic, there were implementation of appropriate infection control practices, and that brought that global outbreak to an end. So again, that was considered an outbreak and not a pandemic. And that virus is still seasonally active, as is H1N1. So there's always the potential for more development with either one of those viruses. So I'm just going to briefly talk about FEMA phases of emergency management because our emergency operations plan is based on this model. And this requires that we have efforts continuously ongoing around prevention and mitigation, and then moving into preparedness, response, and recovery. And this is a continuous cycle that's ongoing. With regard to our prevention and mitigation efforts at the Carson City School District, I feel like we're very fortunate in that we have a lot of good protocols that were put in place back in 2009, long before I came along, due to the H1N1 virus outbreak. My predecessor, Mr. Kevin Kearns, and Sheila Story, and your Director of Operations, Mr. Koronek, all worked very hard together during that outbreak to put in place cleaning and disinfecting protocols, your CHI process for cleaning. There were protocols put in place in the nurse's office to prevent and control spread of illness in the schools. And all of that came out of H1N1. So I anticipate we will have more good things that come out of this pandemic, and that's, I guess, all we can hope for.
And I think that's a great point because we've been doing above the level of most school districts before this pandemic came. Our custodians have been really good about being up above, and we didn't have any influenza outbreaks like Washoe and Clark had.
Right.
And I think that shows it. So when people ask me nowadays if how our cleaning standards are, it's like, well, we were above the cleaning standards before. So a shout out to our staff because they've been doing this for a long time. This isn't anything new. We're not doing a whole lot new now.
Very
just
good at
because
what
of this
they do.
pandemic, because we were already at this standard in this district because of our employees.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to move into just talking about some of the action steps that are described in our emergency operations plan under the preparedness phase. And again, these are not really detailed descriptions of how we're responding to COVID-19 specifically, but just examples of some of the types of action steps you would find under that preparedness phase. So preparedness action steps began in the Carson City School District when the pandemic was first recognized, but not yet in our community. We were already starting these conversations with operations and nutrition and educational services. And we began to develop, exercise, and evaluate and revise our Plan Annex as we did meet in June to take a look at it. We identified essential staff that can maintain health and safety and cross-trained as needed in the district office. So, for instance, if I were to be affected by this disease, who would be handling workers' compensation claims in the HR department and so forth. Developing strategic partnerships within our community and our first responders. We have met with the Carson City Health and Human Services Department. We've met with the fire department. We've met with our law enforcement partners, all talking about how we need to collaborate together to work on this response. Educating the school community about pandemic flu. This is a continuing effort. We began placing a lot of information around the schools, and nurses were providing training and information to staff. We are continuing to order additional posters, floor decals, chair decals, table decals, all kinds of signage. We worked with a facilities management company that came through our buildings about 3 weeks ago. They were given blueprints of every school, and they looked at where appropriate signage would be placed throughout the schools, and then based on those blueprints, designed a plan for signage placement in each school. And we placed an order for all of the schools, so the signage throughout the district will be consistent. It will look the same in all of the schools, and it will be placed at appropriate distances in the hallways and in the cafeterias and libraries and bathrooms and lobbies and entrances.
And I'm just curious, is that going to be in place before the schools open?
Yes, we're expecting to receive the signage by the end of this week. So in addition to educating our school community, I'm also looking to stockpile necessary equipment and supplies to be used during each phase. Mr. Korenick and I began looking at what was in the warehouse and what we were going to need to order in order to get through this. There is a burn rate calculator for cleaning supplies and PPE that's available through the CDC. And we used that to look at what we would need to get through a 181-day school year or half the school year, and then started calculating out those costs and determining what we could feasibly order to be safe. Of course, reviewing our normal cleaning procedures and focusing on high-touch areas as they have always done with their process cleaning. Formulating plans for alternative dining services. We began those discussions with Elizabeth, creating pandemic attendance and sick leave policies, reviewing workplace exposure plans with OSHA. I had a consultation with our local OSHA consultant about 2 months ago, and she and I developed the written workplace safety plan for COVID-19 exposure in the workplace. Identifying critical job functions and positions in the district and planning for any necessary cross-training, planning for distance learning, working with our health department to develop guidelines for student exclusion, and I'll be talking a little bit more in detail about that, and developing a symptom tracking form. Creating an attendance phone line script regarding illness reporting, identifying hard-to-reach families and ensuring communications with them, coordinating with Carson City Health and Human Services to develop health messages in multiple languages, identifying procedures for communicating with the media during normal and emergency conditions, developing public communication strategies for our buildings, and that's more along the lines of what I was just talking about. So that's just a example of some of the preparedness action steps that are spelled out in our emergency operations plan. That particular section of the plan is actually several pages long, so I could read on and on and on, but I think you get the feeling of what types of action steps are being taken when we're preparing to respond. So next, I'd like to talk.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
And maybe this is for Tasha or Rich, but, you know, a lot of the questions that I think we're all getting from staff members are just those concerns about what this looks like and what those precautions are. And so I'm wondering, is there an effort for principals to take those important or pertinent pieces for the schools and share them with staff members to kind of put their minds at ease a little bit?
Yes, so President Walker, I think you'll see more of that more specific protocol-related communication coming out next week. A lot of those protocols are driven by the COVID-19 outbreak response plan that was just provided to us yesterday by the Health Department. So we'll take that document and start looking at very specific action steps that will be taken in the schools.
I think that'll be great, because I think that people are, even the people who want to go back to school are also, you know, a little bit cautious. And I think it'd be the best to really share what we're doing so that they're partners in the process and can help where they can.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that we're doing as well, you know, that Anne actually spearheaded a FAQ for staff members to put a lot of this information in, but we're also doing a welcome back video, where many of our departments are talking about the different steps that are taking place. And I know that those documents are constantly being updated and shared out by Anne as well. So I think those efforts will obviously just continue. I want you to know that Anne has done a phenomenal job sending out to our administrators and our principals. I think now that our teachers are coming back tomorrow, that that information will start making it more directly into the hands of our staff members during their principals' back to school meetings with their staff, et cetera. But there's been a lot of communication internally. And she's done a phenomenal job of trying to keep us all up to date on the numerous changes that continue to happen and the numerous updates. And she'll say, so I told you this morning that such and such and such, and here is now the newest update just 1 hour later. So throw that one away, and here's the new one. But she is doing an amazing job keeping everyone up to date.
Thank you, Tasha. I feel like we're all working very well to do our very best to, you know, prepare and be responsive. And if there's anything we can do to improve in the communication, the transparency of information that we provide to the staff as they return to work, I recognize that that is critically important to them. It's just difficult when the information changes almost every day. So moving from that preparedness phase to response begins when cases begin to appear in our community. So we are currently in this response phase, and those response action steps can vary depending upon the level of community spread, the level of infections in any school, the level of illness that we're seeing amongst staff. So if we were to look back at the H1N1 response plan, you would see very detailed guidelines for schools that would indicate when you have X number of students infected, you will close this school. Or when you have X number of, staff members infected, you will close a school. Or if you have an outbreak in a classroom, you will close that classroom for X number of days and take these steps. We don't have that specific of detail quite yet from our health department because they're still learning about the level of transmission and spread in our community. And local health departments do not give that kind of guidance based on what a school district in New York is doing. Our experience in Carson City will be unique to Carson City. So as they gather data and they begin building that information, then they become a bit more well-informed to provide us with that type of more specific numerical guidance.
Could I ask a question about that? Just So, Mr. Stokes, will you be in touch with the health department as you work through these cases? Will Ann be the person I touch? Just because if we have an outbreak in a school, I think everybody's going to expect that we're right on top of it and we're
Right.
making quick decisions to protect the safety of our students and staff. And so I want to make sure that we have somebody that's in constant contact with the health department.
So I'll describe that a little more fully when I get to the piece where we talk about that specific outbreak plan that we received yesterday. But Mr. Stokes and I did have a meeting on Friday with the health department, and they have now formed a regional task force made up of school personnel from the Quad County region, and we will be meeting weekly. Yeah. So some of those response actions, activating our command staff portion of the ICS chart and communicating to that task force group to be prepared to activate. Setting up a page on the district website to address concerns. So we have the FAQ page up on the website for families, and yesterday we added an additional FAQ page for staff that addresses their more specific employment-related concerns and questions. Communicating the steps that the district is taking to prevent the spread of disease. This type of communication they will be receiving in their staff trainings. Mr. Kornick and I are going on kind of a road show tomorrow to address all of the staff members in their welcome back meetings, answer a lot of their questions, explain to them what those cleaning protocols look like, and what they can expect to see happen if there is an outbreak in their school. Intensify the hand washing and respiratory etiquette campaigns. This goes back to the posters and decals and communication pieces that we purchased. Taking inventory of our cleaning supplies and PPE and ordering additional supplies if necessary. It's so important at this point in time that we really keep focused on those supplies in the warehouse, because as people come back, they want to order all of that and they tend to hoard it in their classrooms. So we want to make sure that we are keeping on top of the orders that are being placed to the warehouse and that we're replenishing those supplies. Having teams on standby to address the emotional impacts of working through a pandemic. It's very stressful for all of us, and to have those EAP resources available to our employees and encourage them to use it is an important part of our response action. Of course, continuing to follow the Carson City Health and Human Services communicable disease guidelines for exclusion of any students or staff. There may be additional guidelines that come from the CDC or the state regarding exclusion of students and staff in the schools. So those things can change rather quickly. Planning to switch over schools that need to close over to the distance learning platform. Being prepared for that distance learning platform to see an increase in demand rather quickly, where the internet services and all of those things are being impacted in a rather quick manner. Developing template letters for situational updates and closures. Activating a larger task group, which is what I just described to you, has been done, and those meetings will begin on Friday with all of the 4 county school districts working together so that our plans are consistent as much as they need to be. Beginning to track staff absences to gather baseline data. Increasing daily cleaning of schools with increased focus on high-touch areas. Our operations staff has acquired additional cleaning methods that have been added on to their process cleaning, so we're now using those electrostatic misters in the classrooms. And today we started looking at a new product called a SaniCart, which can be rolled into a classroom if they have an incident, a student who develops flu-like symptoms or is vomiting. There's a cart that we can roll into that classroom and just turn it on, and it starts misting the whole environment and disinfects it in like 5 minutes. So I know those, we were just discussing those this morning. Valerie Dockery was looking at a grant that could be used to purchase those, and Mr. Kornick was anticipating that we would have them within 2 weeks. I'm not going to promise that because I'm sure there's going to be a run on those.
And before you go on.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, can we reassure the teachers and the staff that adequate disinfecting and cleaning is going to take place? Because I think we've all received those emails from the teachers concerned about that.
Sure.
Can we reassure the staff?
Yes, that is the
going to take
purpose
place?
of our meetings with staff tomorrow. Mr. Kornick and I will be at all of the staff meetings, reassuring them. He'll be explaining to them what that process cleaning looks like, when their classrooms will be treated with the electrostatic foggers, when high-touch surfaces will be wiped down, the frequency of all of these things, and how they can go about requesting additional disinfectant materials for their classrooms if they'd like to have those.
And I think that staff has to remember that the custodians, I mean, they're taking this really serious too. I mean, they're thinking of the staff as family, because our whole school district is like a family.
Yeah.
So for people to think that they're not going to be doing, you know, up and above, it just floors me every time I get those emails, because they don't want anything to happen to their people either.
Yeah, that's true. So the Quad County COVID-19 Outbreak Response Guidelines. This is the document that we were provided yesterday afternoon. It is currently in draft format, and I anticipate that it will probably remain in draft format for quite some time because it's being updated daily. So it's a living document. And this is the document that the 4 county school districts will be using as they develop their own response protocols for an outbreak in their schools. It has input from that whole Quad County task force that they have created, meeting weekly, and provides for a more uniform response protocol in the Quad County region. So if you have a teacher that's in Douglas and a teacher that's in Carson, and they're not having like different things going on in their response protocols for an outbreak in their schools, everything looks kind of consistent in our region. So some of the elements that I can tell you about that are in that outbreak response plan, of course, reports of illness. The health department is now giving us guidance on what to do with incoming illness reports. For an individual school site, the absences are typically reported by the parent, the guardian, a staff member, or a student, either by phone or electronically. Due to the COVID-19 response, Carson City Health and Human Services has now created a COVID-19 symptom screening form for schools to use to record reported absences due to illness, along with a script that can be used to guide staff through that conversation when they're having that conversation. So all of this information is going to be shared out with staff next week, and they'll be trained on how to use that form and be provided with that script. And we'll be providing some training on how they'll be reporting that information to the health district. Carson City Health and Human Services may request that illness reports be submitted daily throughout the duration of the COVID-19 response. This information may also be submitted to the Nevada Division of Public and Behavioral Health if requested. Our health department has provided an illness report log for each school to fill out based on the results from the symptom screening form that schools can use to track their reported incidents. So in addition to those illness reporting protocols that the health department has developed and shared with us, they are also providing protocols on how we can control the spread of the illness in the schools. Measures that would be taken to control spread typically involve exclusion criteria, when to keep children home, when to keep staff home. So we do have some more detailed symptom screening forms that we will be using, and guidelines in terms of how we go about deciding. For the most part, we are encouraging staff with symptoms to call their healthcare provider or their local health department and get tested. That is the best way to find out their status and the length of their exclusion from the school environment. So readmittance criteria has also been included in that outbreak response plan, giving us guidance in terms of deciding when somebody can return to work or return to school. And those guidelines are quite detailed, and I suspect they will be changing over the next few weeks as more data develops. At this time, they're essentially telling us that anyone who is referred to the health department and becomes a case that's managed by the health department can return to the school or work environment once they've been released to do so by the health department. So we will essentially work with the health department to assist them in managing those cases and returning those people to work when it's safe for them to do so. Other measures that are taken to control the spread of illness that are addressed in the COVID-19 outbreak response plan include isolation of ill students and staff. So we do have written protocols in how we will isolate students, and we have created isolation rooms in each of the schools. We have a protocol in place for the nurses to provide to don their PPE and make sure that they're protected when they're working in close contact with a student who has developed flu-like symptoms in school. We have protocols for closure of rooms and buildings, and additional protocols for cleaning and disinfecting those rooms when they have to be closed or when those buildings have to be closed. So there's a period of days where the building is left empty before we bring in our custodial staff to begin cleaning and disinfecting after we've had an illness in that school. And all of these time periods are spelled out in the current draft outbreak response plan. And I didn't want to get into that minute detail with you this evening because it can change very easily within a week or two.
And I think we all understand that. I think that it's just the emails we're getting from staff, and I think we all just want to make sure that that information is being shared with the people in these buildings.
Yep.
And the families who are sending their kids into these buildings. I think we just want to make sure they know the steps that are being taken.
Yep. So moving on beyond response action steps, we then can talk briefly about recovery action steps. And we will get there. There will come a time when we are recovering from COVID-19. And when we get to that place, we will start taking some action steps that we will coordinate with our health department on, and that will include vaccinations in the schools. And these action steps will be developed in collaboration with the Quad County Health Coalition and will be aimed at mitigating education and financial loss. We'll coordinate with the health department to identify school and community resources to provide long-term physical and mental health support to those individuals who have been identified that need that. And we'll need to be conducting an after-action evaluation report with our emergency operations team to just do a look back and see what did we learn from all of this. Are there changes that need to be made to our emergency plan, to our pandemic response plan, and how can we be better prepared the next time this happens? So that is my presentation for you all, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Well, I would just say we don't want to hear it the next time this happens. We just want to get to recovery and
I hope
be done
I'm
at least
retired.
until this group is through their terms.
Yeah.
Any questions from the board? Joe?
Thanks, Ann. And we've addressed it, so I won't go into detail, but as you know, we've gotten so many emails and so
Yes.
much concern, and rightly so. we've tried to be cautious as a district, I'm sure, because we don't want to give out misinformation. And I think sometimes that's construed as you're not providing us the necessary
Right.
information. But it's a very delicate balance of, we say something and it turns out we're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And,
What we said last week
yeah,
is different
best
this
case, we
week.
get in trouble. Worst case, somebody pays a worse price for it. So I just want to thank you and everybody for, it sounds lighthearted, but taking this serious and having, mitigated cautious steps going forward and really getting this information out to everybody now because, with teachers coming back tomorrow and all staff now back in our buildings, there is a lot of concern and people do want the information and need the information. And like Richard said a while ago, this kind of thing really impacts staffing and what people are going to do and whether or not students are coming to our buildings. And so, if we have a clear, consistent plan that we know is going to change, but it's as consistent as we can be, then I think we're doing the right thing for our students and our staff. And I think we're getting there. It's meticulous, but just extend my thanks to everybody that you're working with because we do appreciate it.
I will, thank you. I think the guidance document that we received from the Quad County Health Coalition yesterday will be very helpful.
It would have been nice to have a few extra weeks to look at that before
Wouldn't it have been?
teachers were due back, I'm sure. And I apologize for interrupting with the questions, but there's just things that, you know what I mean? We're getting questions from people. I know I'm getting them daily. So it's just, this is the opportunity to ask some of those questions and really advocate for the way to share the information and kind of put some minds at ease.
I would just like to note too that just want to put a reminder out there to our community members that we are putting all of these documents on our website. So currently we obviously have the district's reopening plan. We have the FAQ we provided or we prepared for parents in English and Spanish. We now have an FAQ that we've prepared for our staff members. Within that FAQ, there will be additional guidance documents as they come out specifically. So we want to make sure all of these are in a place that our parents and our staff members can go back and reference. So I agree. I know some of this information seems like it's coming out late, but it's because as we're processing and coming up with those practices, exactly what you said, President Walker, but we also want to make sure that our stakeholders know that they are now in writing and that they are accessible and that we will keep updating them so that the most updated information is represented within those documents.
No, I think I just would like to make a comment. I think what I would like the public to know and the staff to know that I believe that the steps you guys have taken and the district has taken, that you're doing everything you can to keep the staff and the kids safe. And I think it's important for us to send that message out that we are doing everything in our power to keep everybody safe. So thank you for all your efforts in this area.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate what you're doing. So next item on the agenda will be discussion and possible action on courses approved for dual credit in the Carson City School District in accordance with NRS 389.160. This is for possible action. Tasha Fuson.
Thank you, President Walker. Tasha Fuson for the record. As you all know, we have had Jump Start in our district now for, I believe, going into our 7th year. Part of that program requires that we have a dual credit master list approved at the Department of Ed level that says what courses that we are accepting for both high school and college credit. That master list, the initial master list, actually not the initial, but the last master list, so the overarching, which includes all of the courses, was approved by the board in 2019. So our subsequent ones for over the course of 3 years only have to include new classes. So what I have brought in front of you today is simply a request by WNC to add Math 124 College Algebra to that list. It's a new course that they've introduced I think they've revisioned what used to be 120 and kind of kicked up the level of rigor and made it more relevant to business, et cetera, and are now implementing 124 that they would like to use with our students. So I'm requesting approval by the board to add that to our master list of dual credit courses that we accept.
Thank you. Joe? Feel free.
Let's see, I move that the Carson City School District Board of Trustees approve the list of courses from Western Nevada College, University of Nevada, Reno, Truckee Meadows Community College, and Sierra Nevada College as dual credit courses for the Carson City School District.
Second.
We have a motion by Joe, second by Laurel. Any discussion from the trustees? Seeing none, any public comment?
Seeing no public comment?
All right, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next item on the agenda is discussion and possible action on the Nevada Association of School Boards nominations to be considered for recognition during the 2020 annual conference. This is for possible action. So everybody has, obviously this has been a tough time crunch, and Laurel and I were trying to coordinate as late as 10 o'clock, after 10 o'clock last night on getting some of these finishing touches, and I'm sure some of you have been doing the same with your nomination. So we have a copy. There's only a few that we haven't discussed. So this is for possible action and discussion.
I was just going to say one thing that I read on the, on the nomination I read for Mr. Dan Davis. I'm hoping we can add a paragraph before we submit it about some of the media relations that he's done this year. Because I think it is for this year, so I think if we include an extra paragraph about that, that would be helpful.
Are you going to try to embed
I'll
what a
work on
bratty
that.
brother he's been or
No,
anything like that?
No. Should I even make that comment, though, I guess, if I have to because I should disclose that, but.
Well, I don't think this is for any,
Okay.
yeah.
You want to disclose that he was bratty or?
Well, are you volunteering to do that for us, Laurel?
Yeah, I'll add it.
Okay, so maybe the motion could reflect with additional information to be added to Dan Davis's.
And I'm just thinking, because I added a couple letters late and got them to Renee, and there's a couple things I needed a little bit more information on. So I think if we do make the motion, I think we're approving the nominations, but the letters in support could certainly be added to before they're due to NASB.
I think
Would that be
that's
fair?
fair, because we're, yeah, okay.
Yeah, they would make it a little more general.
Okay.
And then just a note, I couldn't get enough information for the Tim Mulligan one. We could never connect, and so I didn't get that one done. Next year, that's what I think. The other one's we had to decide between one of them anyway,
I think that might have been the one.
so we made that decision a little easier, but I just couldn't get together with him to get enough information, so.
All right. I move that the Carson City School District Board of Trustees approve the Nevada Association of School Boards nominations to be considered for the 2020 annual conference with additional information added to the letters as needed.
All right, we have a motion by Joe, second by Stacy. Any discussion by the trustees or from the trustees? Seeing none. Any public comments?
Seeing no public comment?
All right, did somebody have a question? No? Okay, I'm gonna call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Good luck to all of our nominees. You make us proud, and we hope to be cheering on your award reception. Next item on the agenda is number 13, approval of the consent agenda. This is for possible action.
Make a motion. I move that the Carson City School District Board of Trustees approve the consent agenda as submitted.
Second.
Motion by Dawn, second by Joe. Any discussion from the trustees? Seeing none, any public comment?
Seeing no public comment?
All right, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Item number 14, informational items. I'm sure we're entering busy times, but it sounds like times that aren't quite so public at the school, so probably less trustee participation and stuff, Mr. Stokes. I guess you'll just keep us informed of anything that we could support the district's efforts in.
The one thing I'd just like to say, and I missed it because it was on the consent agenda, but Renee's done a heck of a job of getting the minutes with all the public comments that we've had. And I just wanted to recognize that I think we have the most thorough minutes that I've ever seen for a school board. And I appreciate all that hard work, Renee.
That's why you need to make sure you're talking into that microphone, because she's going to get us if we're not. Seriously, we all do appreciate what you do, Renee. You're awesome. Next item on the agenda is requests for future agenda topics. Seeing none, I think that probably just keeping us all apprised of the ever-changing conditions in the schools and helping us stay afloat for when we get those requests from people. Rich?
If you could, I'd like somebody to come up sooner rather than later with a cure for COVID. So if we could add that to a very recent one, I'd appreciate that.
That's AJ's job.
He did get the highest score in his college biology class. I just was gonna.
I think Mr. Stokes wanted to say something.
I was just going to add, President Walker, members of the board, that I think what we need now is to, as my old football coach used to say, need to have that first snap and that first contact so we lose some of the jitters. We need a little time to find our groove. We need a little chance for our staff members to feel like, hey, we're back in the game, we're here, we're doing what we're doing. And so, yeah, we're looking forward for school to start and to get that rhythm going. And we're expecting to still monitor and adjust what activities have been established. And we'll be working with our staff and listening to what they have to say so that we can manage those changes.
Well, and you know, Mr. Stokes, I said this to you privately yesterday on behalf of the trustees, and I think that we're all appreciative of your service. We're very aware that you could have been long retired by now, and your life would have been a little bit less stressful. So I'm certainly glad that I'm not sitting here kind of coaching a new superintendent through these types of responses. Is I'm able to ask somebody who's been in the job a while his opinion, and so thank you for sticking around. We appreciate your hard work, and we know this has been a trying time for you as well.
I'm surrounded by pros, as you can see here tonight, so they make my job easier. I appreciate their help and support.
So with that, I will adjourn the meeting. See you all in a couple weeks.